Hello and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 61. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. And today I'm letting you in on a little secret. I know about how spirits and dark beings perceive and identify our personal energy signatures or vibrations, and how they discern between different people. And I've always wondered, do they see colours, waves or spikes of energy sort of pinging off our energy fields? Do they hear our voice vibrations? Or whether we have emotional or heat signatures emanating from our physical bodies or our energy fields? And do spirits see us as they would have when they were alive, seeing our hair colour, our eye colour, our height, personality traits, or is it something else? And I'm going to be sharing my personal experiences today, unpacking how paranormal beings, both dark beings and spirits, know when I'm around. So let's get started with spirit level energy today and how spirits see or view us from their own individual perspectives. And I have a sweet little story for you about children's spirits from an old abandoned building here in Tasmania, which I have called Read Me a Story. Now, back when I worked as a paranormal tour guide, one particular building that we used to do our tours in had many spirit children present. And they love to play games and they love to climb all over me, basically. I do love kids, living and in spirit form, just the same. Now, during one visit, I thought I would ask some questions to see how the spirits knew it was me that was present and not one of our other tour guides, because those people didn't get the same level of interaction that I did. Now, I love reading. I really do love books. And working with living children for many years, I worked as a literacy and a speech teacher's assistant. And I know that kids love story time. So why not read to the spirit children in this very old, cold, run-down building where they still reside? So there we were one day, and I was setting myself up one night in this building, and it was in semi-darkness. Like, I had a torchlight to read by, which I could only just see the words. And there was no working electricity in this building. It was just an old abandoned building. So there I sat with my back against a very cold, damp wall. Thankfully, I had a very thick jacket on. And I just sat there on the floor, legs laid straight out, and I just started to read. And I was just going to observe and see what happened. How would they know that I was there? Did they see me come in? Did they hear my voice? Did they recognise the story? We'll soon see. So within 5 minutes, I felt a slight pressure on my knee. And on my left side, I felt a very sort of snuggly type sensation, just as you can imagine a child sort of cuddling up to you to listen to a story. So I stopped reading and I greeted whoever was present. Now, I don't know how many children were present, because like I've talked about before, I'm more a feeler. I feel energy. I don't always see who is around. But I knew there was at least 2 by the different locations of the pressure that I was feeling. Now, the snuggling soon settled, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to ask a question or 2. To receive the answers, I had 2 options. The first was that I was going to use my psychic senses. Now, like I just said, I don't see the spirit world very often, but I do hear them. So I thought I would just sit there and I would listen and I would observe and see if there's any little light flashes or some sort of movement in the room or knocking on the walls. I just wanted to see how they were going to respond. So the other way I was going to do it was with one of our EMF detectors, which was one of the paranormal investigation tools that we use on the tour that night. Now, this device had a gauge on the top that could flicker, And the spirits were now used to activating this gauge as 1 flick for yes and 2 flicks for no. And this device also had a red flashing light on the front, which they used the same. So it was 1 flash for yes, 2 flashes for no. Now, the device I had sort of sitting precariously balanced on my lap, along with the torch and my little spirit visitor, who was sort of snuggled quite happily, just sitting there on my knee. And I set to asking my questions. Now, I did ask first, do you understand my words? And with my device, I got a very strong, very quick yes. So they understand English, which is great. Because I don't speak any other languages. We are here in Tasmania, so the majority of the spirits that would have been present back in the day when this building was very active would have spoken the Queen's English, if you want to put it that way. So next I asked, may I ask you some questions? Because you never assume that spirits want to answer questions. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And again, I got a very big yes, but this time in my head. I kind of heard it, but I saw it as a flash of the word yes. Now, don't ask me how they do that. I don't have any access to that sort of information yet. But it was just very defined. It was like, yes, they're happy to answer some questions. Because they'd seen me a few times. Sometimes spirits won't engage with people if they don't know you. They have to kind of observe you, engage your personality and whether they like you or not, basically, just like living people do. They're exactly the same. Anyway, now I said to them, I'm really, really curious how you see or know that I am here. And these are the questions that I asked and the answers that I got through either my head or through my little paranormal investigation device. Now, the first question was, do you see as you would when you were alive? And there was a bit of a pause. And I've got to know, they don't. They don't see the way that they would have when they were alive. Now, I know most of you are out there going, well, they don't have physical eyes, but they can see energy, as I'm going to talk about in a minute. So they do have a form of vision. So here I am. I'm just going to unpack all the different ways that I think they might be able to see us in physical form or our energy. So question 2, do you see me as energy, either moving or still? So the energy moving around my body or just sort of pumping out a vibration? And there was another pause. No, they answered. So they don't see me as they did when they were alive, and they don't see me as energy. So then I thought, okay, where am I going with this? Because I didn't have any prepared questions. I was just winging it, just seeing what came to me. So question number 3, do you see me as light? Yes, they said very quickly. Now we're getting somewhere. So I wanted to expand on that so they can see a form of light. Because as you'll hear me talk about, we are energy beings in these physical bodies. So we emit energy, we emit light, and we have this energy field around. Some people call it an aura. I call it either the aura or your energy field. So you'll hear me sort of intermingle both terms. It means the same thing. So question number 4 that I asked, do you see colours in my light? And yes, they answered. And I asked, bright colours? It was kind of a wavering yes, no. Sometimes you get this maybe answer. So because I had 2 spirits, both kind of trying to answer at the same time, so it could have been a bit of a yes or a no coming from either of them. So I took that as a maybe. And I imagine too that it depends on the person that they are looking at the time. People who study auras will talk about bright, healthy-looking, vibrant colours are a sign of, healthy chakras, a healthy physical body. If the colours are a bit dull or a bit dark or a bit muddy, it can mean that you're mentally, emotionally, physically unwell. And we'll talk about that in another episode. Then I asked, because I like to unpack. I don't want to just ask one question. I'm going to ask lots while we're on a roll. So question number 5 was, do you see more than one colour? Again, there was another pause, and there was sort of another mixed response of yes and no. So with the 2 spirits present, like I mentioned earlier, maybe one of them sees my light as maybe white or really bright yellow, sort of pumping out that vibration. And maybe the other might see me with different colours. I might have a bit of red or a bit of green. Who knows? Who knows? I don't see auras. It was something that I always wanted to have, that gift, but it wasn't given to me, so I have to work with what I've got. Anyway, question number 6. Do you see different levels of brightness in my light? And I got a yes. And then I said, do you see different levels of brightness in other people's light? And it was yes again. So again, that could go back to our level of health, if we've had enough sleep, whether we're sort of functioning optimally is probably an easy way to say it. So then I asked question number 7, I thought, I'm going to try something different. Do you hear my voice vibration? Again, there was a big resounding yes. Now this time I heard it in my head, like I heard it. Didn't see it, I heard yes. But also got the gauge. It was like one solid flicker really quickly. My voice is rather loud and very distinctive. And now I know that anyone living or non-living can discern my voice quite easily. Now this was great information, and I was getting rather sidetracked, as I always do. And there was a rather sudden, sharp nudge on the book. And I'm like, they're letting me know that I've asked enough questions. They've been very polite and answered them for me, and now it was story time, please. So I set to reading as much Winnie the Pooh as I could before the tour started. Now we'll skip forward to later in the night. After the tour had finished, I hadn't finished the children's story. And people were busy packing up, and I'd done my part of the packing up. And I said to the lady who runs the tours, can I please just go and finish reading this story to the children? Because I knew they'd be waiting, and it was way past their bedtime. So it was interesting that mum or the caretaker hadn't come to get them to put them in bed. Being a fully fledged paranormal addict, I sat down in the same spot, and I had more questions that I kind of formulated in my mind as we'd gone through the tour that night. And I thought it better to ask them quickly before the kids were whisked off to bed by their spiritual caretaker that I mentioned earlier. Now we know that this is a thing. I've seen it in other locations where there are children. Is that either the matron, if they're in the hospital, or the mum or the dad or some other caretaker will come and that's enough now. No more asking questions, no more interacting with the devices. Time for bed. Off you go. Just like when they're alive. But as I was about to ask another question, I heard the word heat in my head. And I went, I wonder where this is going. And I asked, do you see or feel heat coming from us? And there was that kind of wavering yes again on the EMF reader. So that told me a little bit more about what I've always been curious to know, why spirits seem to be able to kind of create cold or, hot or warm spots, or these breezes that flow through locations. Do they create that cold or hot energy? Now I'm sitting there thinking this in my head. I actually didn't say it out loud. And as I'm thinking that, I felt a very sudden hot patch on the front of my body, around about chest level. Now this hot patch was about the size of a tennis ball. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see any red or any heat or any sort of heat waves coming off this area, but I was still sitting in quite a reasonable amount of darkness. But I felt this hotness for about 5 seconds, and then it vanished. And then I heard some rather cute giggling. So these spirits, in some way, had actually read my thoughts. They seem to be able to penetrate our energy. So they read my thoughts, and one of these children, or maybe it was the adult, can't tell you that part, but someone created this very hot patch of energy right in front of my body. You've got to remember, there's no electricity in this building. There were no windows open. It was all locked up, boarded up so that no one could get in there. There were no holes in the roof where I was sitting, no holes in the floor. There was no possibility of anything rational creating this heat patch. Do they see or feel heat coming from us? Well, they've created heat. I didn't actually get a definite answer, but I imagine if I think about it, if I unpack it, if they're able to create heat, they're then able to, well, I'm thinking that they're able to actually see heat or feel heat coming from us. So after asking all these questions, I have come to the conclusion that spirits all have different perceptions and skill levels, just like living people do. And they can see and sense us in their own unique ways. Like I've experienced, and I'm just remembering the electric shocks on my eyelids. So apart from seeing our energy, sort of being able to create this heat, seeing our different colours that are around us, they can actually project energy at us and our physical bodies can feel it, which is one of those little funny things that I always like to share with people. Some of the things that I go through in my work is just quite abstract. It's the only way to explain it. Now, this is something else that I thought about with spirits, sort of how they see us, how they know that we're around, how do they understand us? Do they understand languages other than their own? Now, if you're thinking about this in a practical sense, someone that's been brought up with French all their life and has never known any other language than French, when they pass from their body, they are still going to understand French. So you'll find this little example quite interesting. These spirits were of English descent, and I know that because of the history that goes with the building. So they had no problems with understanding the language that I was speaking. Maybe the accent might have been a little bit tricky, but they understood the words enough to read my mind and work out that I was curious about heat. Anyway, back to this story. I talked a lot in episode 37 about spirits and how they understand our languages, and dark energies and how they understand our languages and how they communicate with us. Now, luckily, I only visit sites generally with English-speaking spirits, as I don't speak any other language. Now, I've seen online when people go and do paranormal investigations in other countries that quite often they'll have to learn some of the local language so that they can interact with the spirits in different locations. Now, this you'll find interesting. In that particular location here in Tasmania, there was a very gruff, grumpy German adult male spirit. Now, apparently he'd been the gardener or a caretaker, possibly some 60, 80 or even longer years ago. And he didn't take kindly to people visiting the property. So to calm this spirit down, because he'd be not aggressive, that's not the right word, but he would push and shove people. He was a little bit more than just, he wasn't playing. He was a little bit more forceful. But then again, he may have just been protecting the property that he worked at. We don't know the man, don't know why he was doing what he did. But what we did do, we got someone in who spoke fluent German, and they were able to communicate with this male spirit. And this is where we know that he was a gardener. And he seemed to settle down after he had some comforting communication and explanations as to why there were people coming and going in the building so often. I can't remember how we knew he was German. Maybe someone who had been on tour had heard a German word in their head. I can't remember back that far. It's probably 10 years ago now. I thought you might find that rather interesting. Now let's look at how darker energy beings perceive our energy. Now these guys, oh my goodness, these guys are less likely to answer questions. So I can only offer you my observations and my experiences from the last 30 years. Now mind you, I did have a conversation one night with a demonic being who came into my bedroom, and I talked about that in episode 34. But he actually instigated that conversation on his terms as he came looking for answers. I actually didn't get to ask many questions in that situation because he just wanted to know. He was quite a high-ranking demonic level being. So us mere humans don't get much of a say. He didn't harm me in any way. He was more curious about who I am, why I do the work I do, and why I interact with his beings the way that I do. So if you want to know more about that, you can listen to episode 34. So let's look at dark entities and why or how they perceive our energy. Now, all the time I talk about dark entities as being energetic feeders. They're drawn to us because of the negative emotional vibrations that we emit, like beacons. Like seriously, people who create a lot of resentment are pumping out the resentment. Those that create a lot of hatred, pumping out the hatred. And from my collected knowledge, these beings are purely interested in these vibrations, or these frequencies, as some people call it, that we create in the human environment. Now, sometimes they're drawn to single frequencies, like I just mentioned. Sometimes they're also drawn to collective frequencies, as I call them, from places around the world where there's been disasters, where there's been wars, where there's been mass suffering. So those beings simply perceive our energy, and this is only my perspective, they perceive our energy from our vibrations. I emit an energy worker, a light worker, a paranormal worker frequency, and probably a very bright, beaming lighthouse type beacon. And I think, from my level of doing this work for such a long time, is that I've become rather well known in the dark realm, on their grapevine, as we humans call it. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just is what it is. Now let's look at a different level of dark energy being. Now these beings are what I call curse entities, and these are a totally different level of dark being. They're not attracted to emotional imprints. They are attached to black magic invocations. And how they find us in the earth environment is rather interesting. In episode 58, I started to unpack about who these beings are, why they're here, how they interact in our environment, what they get up to. So if you want to have a full listen to that, you can go back to episode 58. I'm going to talk about something slightly different in this next part. Now, those beings, they're sent on missions by humans to do harm to other humans. It just is what it is. I don't like it, but I've experienced it, so I know what it feels like. Now, I don't have vast amounts of experience with these rather fascinating entities. I'm still learning. I'm still getting to know them and understand, all the different facets of why they are here and what they get up to. But now, as they've become more regular visitors in my environment, I can share the following information with you about how they find us amongst the billions of human vibrations that are present here on Earth. Now, these energy beings find us by name through the words either visually, like written down, or spoken by the black magic practitioner. But also think too, these beings, can they understand English or French or German? That's a whole topic for another episode down the track. But when I sat down and I thought about this particular experience that I had with these beings personally, I had to sort of unpack how did they find me amongst all these people on Earth. I'm just putting some options out there. If you can think of another way that this might work, please feel free to email me. All my details are in the description box. But I think it is the frequency or the vibration of the name. When it's said along with an image of what the person looks like. Now, how do I know that, you're asking? Well, if you think about it, I'm really good at unpacking this stuff and thinking very practically. There have to be at least 100 annaschmidts in the world at any given time. It's a very common name. And I can imagine a demon sent out to ruffle up my feathers and getting confused and lost and ending up somewhere else on the other side of the world with some other poor, unsuspecting annaschmidt, just minding their own business, and bam, full-on frontal attack with all this magical energy. This person would just not understand what is going on. So they must be able to use the name. They must be able to see the name. They must be able to visually see my face. Maybe the person has my address. Or do they work from just purely tracking down my vibration? This topic is so woo-woo. It's so off the rails. I'm just giving you my perspective today. It's just one of those things that I just like to share. I just like to get people thinking about what's around us. Also too, if the magical human invoker has hair, clothing or items, or even books or something else that belong to the recipient of this spell, curse or hex, these entities, I imagine them to be a bit like sniffer dogs, and they're just going to hunt you down by your energetic scent. Now, I know it sounds dramatic, but it's not really. It's just kind of an easy way of me to explain it to you. And I think this is what happened to me through my personal experience. The person that instigated this magical action is a local Tasmanian, and this person had a book that I'd written. Now, I touched the book. I'd given the book. So my energy was on the book. This person didn't have anything else that was mine, other than maybe looking on social media and seeing a photo of me, printing out a photo of me, maybe showing the beings this podcast and they hear the vibration in my voice. So you've got to think in a broad sense when you're dealing with this stuff. So I hope you found that rather interesting. And that's pretty much all there is for today's episode. I hope I haven't unnerved or frightened anybody that's been listening to this today. This whole podcast is about building awareness about the energy world around us and giving you insight into the signs and the symptoms of these detrimental energetic intruders that can be in homes, be in other locations, be around people. Now, if you want to know more about the curse entities and the signs and symptoms of their presence, go back and have a listen to episode 58. That is a really good place to start. And as my knowledge grows about these beings and why they're here and what they get up to and so forth, I'm going to be sharing with you what I learn in future episodes. So in episode 62, I'm going to be sharing with you what I know and have experienced with the elemental realm. This is another realm of energy beings altogether. These guys aren't attached to the dark realm. They're not attached to the light realm. They're in their own dimension, if you want to look at it that way. And how these energy beings live quite happily amongst us. And I have various experiences over the years with gnomes. And I'll be sharing everything from gnomes causing mischief in a friend's shed, and another lot kicking me in the kneecaps, and another one who got really annoyed with a friend of mine and continuously poked this person in the head all night and jumped up and down on their bed because something had changed in the house. Now, I don't want to give away too much because it's rather funny. It'll be a funny little episode for a change. No talk about dark beings in that episode. Just our funny little elemental beings that are in our environment. Oh, and also, I have a fascinating troll elemental being experience to share with you. A recap, mostly. I shared the whole story back in episode 4 if you want to have a listen. But I will give you a little recap and maybe some other information that I've learnt about that being since then. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.